Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. We are broadcasting from, we're in a classroom at Bhaktivedanta College in Ranadesh. So we've got a projector board behind it, kind of good for effects. And my folio was, I was looking up something on the folio I wanted to read, and it's not coming up, I don't know. Folio is in a bad mood right now. Sometimes there's letters Prabhupada wrote that are well known and well spread around the movement, and it's not coming up. And sometimes the folio just doesn't cooperate. Or I'm not spelling it correctly. Or it was originally spelled wrong in the letter. Oh, now we might find it. Okay, I found the letter. Fantastic. So I thought we would, I thought we could read this letter, because I came across it today, and it was very interesting. I may have read it before with you, but this letter is very interesting, and I think it would make a good topic of discussion. It's a little bit managerial, but I think it's relevant. Prabhupada is talking about how to engage devotees. He was talking about problems that are going on in the movement and why those problems are there. So I thought that's quite interesting. We could discuss why those problems are there. So this is a letter to Purandar. Is it light enough here? Or as I don't have the lights on, I just have a big window. I could make it lighter, but when you put lights, this is natural lighting. I don't know if it's okay. So, I'll begin reading the letter. It's kind of self-explanatory, but still, I think we can talk about it. I am a little observing now, especially in your country, that our men are losing their enthusiasm for spreading on our programs of Krishna consciousness movement. Otherwise, why so many letters of problems are coming, dissatisfied? That is not a good sign. The whole problem is they are not following the regulative principles. That I can detect. Without this, enthusiasm will be lacking. Even mechanically following, and if he gets gradually understanding from the class, he will come to the point of spontaneous enthusiasm. This spontaneous, loving devotional service is not so easy matter, but if one simply sticks strictly to the rules and regulations, like rising early, chanting 16 rounds, chanting Gayatri, keeping always clean, then his enthusiasm will grow more and more. And if there is also patience and determination, one day he will come to the platform of spontaneous devotion. Then his life will be perfect. All of this I have told you in Nectar of Devotion. So I do not think the leaders are themselves following, nor they are seeing the others are following strictly. that must be rectified at once. Each center remain independent, that's all right. But the president and the other officers must themselves follow and see others are following the regulative principles carefully, and giving them good instruction so that they may understand nicely why this tapasya is necessary. I want to go back, just help you understand this sequence of what Prabhupada is saying. So the first thing Prabhupada is pointing out is that he's noticing there's been a lack of enthusiasm. And then he determines that lack of enthusiasm is a result of not following regulative principles. And then he says, I'm getting so many letters of problems. So problems could mean, in this case, problems in following the principles or just dissatisfaction. So Prabhupada is determining why. And he's saying that, or specifically here, these letters could also relate to lack of determination. So Prabhupada is saying, if you follow the principles, you get determination. And therefore it must mean that he's getting letters where people are having difficulty, wanting to give up, and so forth. And then Prabhupada goes on to say, he says that even if you follow mechanically in the beginning, but still by following, determination will come. And then the next thing he says is that eventually it will bring you to spontaneous devotional service. And then in spontaneous devotional service, that's your perfection. So the perfection we're looking for is through the practice of Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. Through following rules and regulations, we're looking that someday that we can come to the point of spontaneous devotional service, where we're naturally attracted to serving Krishna, not being forced, but being always enthusiastic. So Prabhupada is saying that by following the regulations, even you force yourself, you don't like to do it, but you do it, someday you'll come to that platform. And when you come to that platform, that's the perfection. So if we don't follow the rules and regulations just because we don't feel like it, then we're not going to come to that platform. And Prabhupada's point, and we talked about this in the workshop on vows, is that it's not about wanting to follow the rules and regulations. It's just about following them, because by following them, then you naturally get determination in Krishna consciousness. So let's say I'm not determined, and Prabhupada would say, if you're not determined, follow the rules and regulations. And to us it sounds like, well, that's one step beyond where I am. I'm not determined to follow them. But Prabhupada's point is, by following them, that's where the determination will come. So if you wait to find determination to follow them, then maybe that won't come. But if you commit to following them, whether you feel like it or not, then as a result of that, the determination comes. So that's the point Prabhupada made in another letter. Because sometimes our thinking is, well, I need the determination to follow. And Prabhupada's saying, if you've committed, if you've taken initiation, then you follow. If you live in a temple, you follow. If you've made that commitment, you follow even if you don't feel like following. So it's not a question of feeling or not feeling like you want to do it. You just do it. For our Western mentality, that always doesn't seem right, or we should say it always doesn't feel right, because we're very accustomed to work based on our feelings. So if I don't feel like doing something, sometimes it's difficult to do. And Prabhupada's saying you may or may not feel like it, but if you do it, your determination will come to follow and continue. And then if you do it long enough, you'll come to spontaneous devotional service. And therefore, if you're lacking enthusiasm, to Prabhupada it's a sign that you're not following. Each center remained independent, that's all right. But the president and other officers must themselves follow and see others are following the regulative principles carefully and giving them good instructions so they may understand nicely why tapasya is necessary. So Prabhupada's saying here, if you're a leader, your duty is to follow, set an example, and inspire others to follow. And then Prabhupada explains an important point. He says that we become inspired to do tapasya by understanding the benefit of tapasya, because naturally we want to be comfortable, or naturally the body wants to enjoy its senses. So tapasya means you're restricting. You'll do some fasting, you'll rise early, maybe you'll take a cold bath, which is recommended in Shastra in the morning. Take a cold bath. It purifies the body, it wakes you up, it purifies you of sinful reaction. It's very, very powerful. And then chanting 16 rounds until you have a taste can be a form of tapasya. So Prabhupada is saying that in order for someone to be convinced to do this tapasya, you don't want to force them, because that won't inspire them. But you want to educate them so that they understand the value of it. And by understanding the value of it, they'll do it. So that works both for us as practitioners and for us as leaders. As practitioners, we want to understand why we should do this tapasya. Just like if you tell someone to get up early, a lot of times it's very distasteful, just the thought. Then you have to explain what happens early in the morning, why early in the morning is so valuable, why your spiritual life is very much dependent on rising early, because it's sattvic, and it gives you time before your day starts to focus on hearing and chanting. And also because we should perform austerity, and that's one of the main austerities we perform. So by hearing, you'll get some impetus. That's Prabhupada's point. And GBC and sannyasis will travel and see the officers are doing this. And if they observe anything lowering of the standard, they must reform and advise. Or if there is some discrepancy, I shall remove it. Of course, if new men are coming, they may not be expected immediately to take to our regulative principles cent per cent. Therefore, we should not be so anxious to induce them to live in the temple. Anyone who lives in the temple must agree to follow the rules and regulations without fail. So if some new man moves in with us, he may become discouraged if he is forced in this way. Therefore, let them live outside and become gradually convinced in the class why they should accept some austerity. Then they will live with us out of their own accord and follow nicely everything. It's very difficult to give up very quickly so many bad habits as you have got in your country. So educate them gradually, first with chanting. And do not be so much anxious to count up so many numbers of new devotees. If such devotees go away later, being too early forced. We want to see a few sincere devotees, not many false devotees or pretenders. So again, Prabhupada's making the same point, that in order to do austerity, it's required that you understand why. You have to want to do it yourself. You can't be forced, it won't last. And that's the point Prabhupada's making. He said if you force someone to move in the temple, now they're not fully convinced of why they should be doing the austerity, but rather they're being forced to do it. It's not going to last. So Prabhupada's saying we don't want to make a lot of devotees and lose a lot of devotees. Rather, we want people to come who are inspired by understanding our philosophy to practice Krishna consciousness. We don't want to create an institution where we're having to force everybody, where nobody's inspired to rise early and follow the morning program, but we're always pushing, forcing, demanding, maybe even threatening. That's not the mood we want to create. We want to create a mood which devotees are spontaneously or naturally wanting to perform these activities. So then Prabhupada ends this paragraph by saying that it's okay if we don't have a lot of new devotees. It's better we have those that want to be here and are enthusiastic than those we have to force. So if you read between the lines, one thing you can say is if you have devotees that aren't really of their own volition practicing Krishna consciousness, it will contaminate, in a sense, the atmosphere for those who are spontaneously trying to be Krishna conscious. So so Prabhupada's saying in a temple, we want people, or in a community, we want people who want to practice Krishna consciousness, who want to be pure devotees, who like it, who are forcing themselves, who are willing to attend programs. That's the kind of community you want. So Prabhupada's, he's addressing the issue because he knows that in some temples that's not necessarily going on. Some people are not following, as we said earlier, because they're not committing, or they just don't feel the inspiration. So what Prabhupada's saying is, another point he's making is that you don't want to, you want people in the temple who want to do this because they want to do it, not because you push, and force. And that's a lesson to us, that we become inspired ultimately from our own understanding of Krishna consciousness, why it's valuable, what it is, why we need to practice it. And then we gain determination because we realize the benefit of Krishna consciousness, and we don't have to become dependent on others pushing. It's a little dangerous to be too dependent. Dependency is good, but if we're too dependent, then we can't function well. We can't function well unless we're always being pushed. And so Prabhupada's saying, no, that pushing has to come from within. It comes from us, through our own understanding of the value of Krishna consciousness. Just like if you understand the value of anything, and you really want to get it, you want to achieve it, then naturally you will push yourself. So that's Prabhupada's point. Push yourself. Don't be reliant on other people to always push you. It's okay. We need pushing. But if we only can be pushed by others, that's a very bad sign. It's a danger sign that we've become dependent in an unhealthy way, that we have no impetus ourselves. So Prabhupada is saying we don't want to create that kind of environment in our temples where everyone is being pushed. We're encouraged, we're informed, but the main thing the leaders are doing is educating, so that we want to do it ourselves. Okay. So I'll continue reading. So my point is that the regulative principles must be followed by everyone. Otherwise, their enthusiasm dwindles, and they again think of sex and become restless, and so many problems are there. So, if devotees are becoming restless, or they're having difficulty controlling their minds, the Prabhupada's solution is you follow the regulative principles, and then we go back to that point. Well, if I'm restless, how can I follow? And Prabhupada's saying you commit to following, and that will cure your restlessness. So restlessness is, I don't feel like it, I don't want to, it's difficult, I don't like this, I don't like that. And so Prabhupada's saying, if you allow your mind to control you that way, then you won't be successful. So even your mind may be going that way, you don't. You still commit to your principles. And therefore Prabhupada's saying, if people are restless, then the solution is to follow, although we don't always think that's the solution. We think the solution is nothing, I'm just restless. Or we think I can't follow. It's too difficult. And Prabhupada never felt that it was too difficult. He never felt that way. So he just felt that because you value Krishna consciousness, you'll pay the price. Okay, in a sense difficult, but in this other sense that if you value it, you value something, then it's not really too difficult to do what you have to do to get it, because it's so important for you. The more important it is, then in a sense, the less difficult the difficulties are, because you don't really focus on the difficulties, you focus on what you want. And when you don't want something, you tend to focus more on the difficulties, because the prize, if it's not really inspirational for you, then the difficulties become bigger, and the difficulties don't seem worth it. Whereas if the prize is valuable, the difficulties are just what you have to tolerate in order to achieve your goal. So that, again, Prabhupada's making the point that if you understand the value of Krishna consciousness, that gives you the impetus, right? Because you want it so much that you're willing to undergo austerity, and you're willing to undergo whatever difficulties you have to undergo in order to achieve it. And if you're getting mental and restless, then Prabhupada's indicating you're not following the principles. That's what happens. And he's saying, naturally we're inclined as conditioned souls to not follow the four regular principles. So if you don't strictly commit to following, then naturally the desire to not follow will come up. In any weakened state, the desire for not following one or more of the regular principles is going to be there. So that's our conditioned nature. And so that just means a weakness in our resolve to follow. Okay. So my point is that the regulative principles must be followed by everyone. Otherwise their enthusiasm dwindles. And they again think of sex and become restless, and so many problems are there. There is some symptom of missing the point. The point is to be engaged in doing something for Krishna. Never mind what is that job, but being so engaged in doing something very satisfying to the devotee that he remains always enthusiastic. So here's a point that we've spoken about before. We've spoken about this in our Finding Your Dharma class, and we've spoken about it elsewhere as well. That Prabhupada's making an interesting point here. So normally we think in terms of service that we should do what is necessary. We should do the needful. And we should be surrendered souls. And that's true. But Prabhupada's giving us another enlightened understanding or aspect of service. That service is meant ultimately for our benefit. So that if I'm serving Krishna and I'm doing something that's inspiring to me, it then inspires me to follow the regulative principles. That's what Prabhupada meant when he said, the point is to be engaged in doing something for Krishna. Never mind what is the job. That's interesting. Whatever you're doing, he's saying, whatever it is, doesn't matter. You can do so many things because service is absolute. And then you might say, well, Prabhupada wanted us to open temples, he wanted us to distribute books, have Rath Yatra. Yeah, that's for sure. But within those services, there's so many things you can do to support those services and the many other services we do. And many projects we haven't started yet could be something that we develop. So, be engaged in something that's very much satisfying. So the devotee always remains enthusiastic. When you do something you like, you remain enthusiastic naturally because you like it, you think about it, you want to do it. So it's your energy is being extracted for Krishna's service because you like it. And Prabhupada says here, very interesting point, I've talked about this before, but it's worth talking about again. He will automatically follow the regulative principles because they are part of his occupational duty. By applying them practically as his occupational duty, he realizes the happy result of regulative principles. So I think there's two ways to look at it. You look at it from the side that if you follow regulative principles, you'll be enthusiastic. And if you're enthusiastic, you'll follow regulative principles. And then Prabhupada's saying, he's saying here that to be successful, if you want to be successful in your service, and you like your service and you want to expand it and do better, then you understand the importance of following the regular principles, how they're connected to the success of your service. And as a result of connecting it to the success of your service, you're more inclined to follow the regular principles. Because see, the idea is that in Krishna consciousness, our ultimate success is not because of material ability, it's because of spiritual power. Chaitanya Charitamrita says, Krishna Shakti Vina Nahi Tara Pravartana. You can't spread Krishna consciousness without spiritual power. Material power helps, ability to organize, ability to manage, all these things are there. But the basis is spiritual power. The purity, as Prabhupada said, purity is the force. So when you're doing your service, you have a service you really like and you really want to be successful, you understand intuitively that the purity that you'll get from following the morning program, following the principles, chanting your rounds, is connected with the success or your ability to succeed in your service because it's not something material. So it creates this connection. But what we also find is if you like your service, if you're enthused in your service, it makes it easier to do your sadhana. Naturally, if you do your sadhana well, you do your service well. And so Prabhupada's saying they're intimately connected. Okay? And then Prabhupada says that if you adopt the principles and you're following them well, then you realize the happy result of following them. Then it becomes easy to continue following because you're happy following them. And if you're happy following them, you're going to continue following them. So the future of this Krishna consciousness movement is very bright. So long the managers remain vigilant that 16 rounds are being chanted by everyone without fail, that they are all rising before 4 morning, attending Mangalartik. Our leaders shall be careful not to kill the spirit of enthusiastic service, which is individual and spontaneous and voluntary. So Prabhupada is making 2 points here. So he's saying that we have this morning program. Of course, Prabhupada here is referring specifically to devotees living in the temple, but I believe if we're living outside, our life outside should resemble temple life as far as is practical and possible. So we should also be rising early, doing some deity worship, chanting Guru Vastakam, chanting our rounds like that, listening to class. As far as you can do that, that's better. So Prabhupada's addressing here the temple devotees, and he's saying that basically what he's saying is that if we follow this program, we'll be successful because the success comes from purity. And so if we're pure, we can't fail, and if we're not pure, it's unlikely we will succeed, at least not succeed to the level that Prabhupada intended us. I mean, you could succeed externally, you can have buildings, you can have programs, but we have to be able to give something to people, and those who are giving it have to be exemplars of what they're giving. So Prabhupada is pointing out if we follow these principles, we'll always remain pure, and then the movement will be successful. It basically is saying it cannot fail if we remain pure. And if we compromise, then if you want to take it the other way, if we compromise, it's either not going to succeed or it's not going to succeed to the level that it could succeed or should succeed. So then the second half of the sentence, Prabhupada says, be careful not to kill the spirit of enthusiastic service, which is individual and spontaneous and voluntary. So it goes back to that point. So Prabhupada is basically summarizing here the importance of following the regular principles and the importance of inspiring devotees. And if you connect these two, then Prabhupada is saying if they follow the morning program, they'll be inspired. If they don't follow, they're probably not going to be inspired. But secondarily, don't force and engage people in services that inspire them. Don't be like an army general. That's not going to work. Prabhupada's saying that devotional service is spontaneous. It's, what does he say? Kill the spirit of enthusiastic service, which is individual and spontaneous and voluntary. Individual means that different devotees will be attracted to different services. Spontaneous is that same thing, that you'll be spontaneous about something you're attracted to. Involuntary means you can't force somebody to do something they don't want to do. So as a manager, or even as a devotee, understanding that we serve because we're voluntarily serving. And in another letter, Prabhupada said that when people are doing voluntary service, you can't always force them because they're doing it of their own volition, and they could always go away. So we need to understand that also about ourselves, that if it's voluntary, we don't have to do it. That means there has to be some attraction to doing it, right? So that's there. And voluntary for others, that we find what they like, understanding that they don't have to do it, they're not being paid. Okay. They should, talking about leaders, they should try always to generate some atmosphere of fresh challenge to the devotees, so that they will agree enthusiastically to rise and meet it. That is the art of management, to draw out spontaneous loving spirit of sacrificing some energy for Krishna. I think also, as you become pure, your presence inspires people, because you're blissfully engaged in devotional service yourself. And therefore, people see that and they become inspired. Understanding or seeing how blissful you are, and also understanding that they'll become blissful by serving Krishna. So a lot of the inspiration is exemplary, just by your purity of your devotional service, you can inspire people. And but here Prabhupada's saying, create an atmosphere of fresh challenge. It means find a service that someone is very enthusiastic about. And so here's a challenge, can you do this? Let's do this festival. And you really like to do festivals, so you give some vision for an amazing festival, and it becomes a challenge for the devotee, and the devotee rises to meet it. So the devotee works very hard, is very enthusiastic. So if you have a temple of people who are all engaged in services that are very inspiring, then it's just a wonderful atmosphere. And then if I'm inspired, you'll be inspired. If you're inspired, I'll be inspired. If you're inspired, you'll inspire someone else. And so I remember very clearly during Prabhupada's presence with us that there are some temples that were so inspired that if you would just go there for a day, that's all you would need to rejuvenate. There were so many wonderful things going on. Devotees were very, very enthusiastic. They were relishing devotional service so much that being in their presence was like a panacea for any problem you had. So that's a lot of how the Krishna consciousness movement spread. It was just one devotee enthusing another, and that enthusiasm became synergistic. And devotees would travel, and then they would share their enthusiasm, and then the devotees in the temple would imbibe that enthusiasm, share it with the devotees in their temple. So I could say we could last enthusiastically in our devotional service without Prabhupada's presence. We maybe saw him once a year for a few days, but because of the enthusiastic association we had, we could go on enthusiastically, even in spite of not having his presence. So they should always try, the leaders, generate some atmosphere of fresh challenge to the devotees so that they will agree enthusiastically to rise and meet it. That is the art of management, to draw out spontaneous loving spirit of sacrificing some comforts and become complacent or self-centered. So, when you're enthusiastic, you make sacrifice. And Prabhupada's saying, and if not, then you become complacent or self-centered. It's all about, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. Now you might think inspiration and service is self-centered. It really isn't. I don't see inspiration as so self-centered. I mean, some Times it's spoken of that way, but the inspiration is to give it to Krishna. So that's the main thing, that you're attracted to doing a certain service, but you're doing that for Krishna. Krishna is the enjoyer of that service. So what Prabhupada's saying, if we're not enthusiastic in our service, then we start to think about all our problems and what I want, what I don't want materially. Otherwise, if we're enthusiastic, we make sacrifice. So even you say, I like to do this service, it's my nature, it seems selfish. No, but when you do the service, you'll make so much sacrifice. That's natural. That is the art of management, to draw out spontaneous loving spirit of sacrificing some comforts and become complacent or self-contented. So, there must always be some tapasya, strictly observing the regulative principles. Krishna consciousness movement must always be a challenge, a great achievement to be gained by voluntary desire to do it, and that will keep it healthy. So this is a nice point, there always must be some tapasya. And it's ideal if we can come to the point where we look at tapasyas in a favorable way, when we look at sacrifice or austerity. Oh, today's a fast day. We don't think, oh no, we think, oh, this is good for me, I need to fast. Or I'm going to bed late, but I need to get up early. And we think, oh, my body won't be comfortable. But to think, no, austerity is good. Krishna is pleased by that, Prabhupada is pleased, I can do more service. So to gain a more positive attitude towards austerity is really, really important. And voluntarily accepting some austerity in a positive way is really good. So if there's some challenging service or some difficulty, and we accept it as we know it's going to be an austerity, but we accept it in a positive way, that's really good. So no, Krishna needs me to do this, or this service needs to be done, I'm willing to do it. It's going to be austere, whatever it is, but I'm willing to do it because it's necessary. And when you're in that mood, you don't always notice the austerity, or you begin to relish the austerity. Austerity becomes more pleasing than comfort, material comfort, because by austerity you become Krishna conscious. By material comfort you don't become Krishna conscious. So material comfort feels good for the body, but it doesn't feel good for the soul, right? So we have to understand that austerity raises our consciousness. If we raise our consciousness, we're happy. So austerity actually equals happiness. Material comfort doesn't equal happiness. It doesn't elevate us in Krishna consciousness. It just actually keeps us puts us a little bit more attached to our bodies and bodily comfort. So austerity is, it's difficult on the body, but what you experience in your consciousness as a result of austerity is very special. It's something that you can't experience unless you do the austerity. And if you do austerity, maybe you've done Sankirtan, you've gone out all day, it's the end of the day. You come back at night, the day was hard, but you feel blissful. It might have been cold, you might have met a lot of nasty people, but when you come back in the evening, because you've done that austerity, you feel blissful. And that's the difference between sense gratification and austerity. Through austerity, you get a kind of purification you can't get any other way. And purification is always blissful. That's the idea. There must always be some tapasya, strictly observing the regulative principles. Krishna consciousness movement must be always a challenge, a great achievement to be gained by voluntary desire to do so, and that will keep it healthy. So what Prabhupada's saying is, when we're all following the principles and we have some service that inspires us, the Krishna conscious movement will be successful. These two things right there is basically, this whole letter is two things. Find what devotees do, educate them why they should do austerity, inspire them through that education to rise early, follow the program, and we'll be successful. Because if we're enthusiastic, we'll be successful. As I've always said, sometimes devotees, in the name of surrender, they bloop. They're so surrendered and so uninspired that one day they go away. Because we had so many services they had to do, and we pushed them beyond their threshold. they didn't give them enough time to hear and chant, we let them be slack in their sadhana, then there's no impetus to follow. And so they go away, they're not happy, they're not inspired. Okay. So you big managers now try to train up more and more competent preachers and managers like yourself. The Prabhupada, with this letter, one of the things that comes out of this letter is that Prabhupada's talking about, he's talking about individuals being inspired, because I'll tell you a little history. This letter came in response to a move by the GBC where they wanted to centralize some of the management. And I don't remember the exact details, but centralization means one man will organize something for many temples. And Prabhupada said, well, I want each temple to learn how to do that. So I don't want them to manage for somebody else. So in the end, he's saying, forget this centralization and bureaucracy. And he's saying, train up devotees to be preachers and managers. In other words, they should learn how to do everything themselves. They should be inspired themselves. They shouldn't be like getting handouts from others. Others do things for them. He probably didn't think that was healthy. He didn't think the communist idea was healthy because it makes people lazy. He wanted each temple to be independent, and the devotees, even one devotee could do it for 10 temples. He wanted the local devotees to do what had to be done managerially, and also learn how to do all the services. And we did get training how to do them, but he wanted training to be locally. So that kind of brings this point, it helps us understand this letter in the light of how we should be spontaneous. Individually, spontaneously engaged, and not just looking for handouts by others, that others would do everything. And we would, do as little as possible just to get by. That's, this letter really goes in the opposite direction. No, you want to manage in a way that devotees are giving, sacrificing more and more in their service, doing things they really want to do, things that really inspire them. And that's what we want. We want temples of devotees who are inspired. We don't want temples of devotees who are surrendered and uninspired. It doesn't work. In a sense, it's a contradiction. If I'm surrendered, how could I be uninspired? But if I'm being forced and I'm not being taken care of well, then I may be uninspired. So why don't we stop here? We've gone about 45 minutes. Do you have any questions or comments on this? I know this was just a random class. I haven't come up with another topic yet for the next series of classes. So I came across this letter. I've read this letter many times. I came across this letter before, and I read it this morning. No, I read it about an hour before class. And it's just made a deep impression on me, and I think it's very instructive for us individually to be engaged in services in which we're inspired, services that inspire us to follow regular principles, and also what this letter obviously does is it reinforces the importance of our sadhana as the foundation upon which we will be successful, and the foundation upon which we become inspired. So, stick tight to your sadhana, that's very important. Be engaged in services which inspire you. Now, I know some of you are inspired by anything, that's fine. Some people are artists that are inspired by art or music or drama or filmmaking or whatever. And some people are just inspired to serve Krishna. That's fine, that's okay. No problem. Everything is good. Okay, so I'm getting inspired to turn the lights on because it was sunny when I started, now it's cloudy and I must look dark. So hold on a second, I'm going to turn on some lights. See if we can light things up a minute while you think of your questions. So don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. Hare Krishna. How does that look? Look any better or worse? I've got light all over my forehead. Not professional lighting. Yes. Okay. Chat me a message. Chat me a question, or you have no questions, or what you all. What happened? You all fainted when you heard this class? Oh no, I can't do that. What comes out of this is, I think it's quite clear. Prabhupada said, rise at 4 o'clock. Wow. Every day rise at 4. Go to Mangalarti. This is like Prabhupada's mantra, rise at 4, take bath, go to Mangalarti, chant. It's like, do that. That's where you get the purity. Do that every day. That's where it all comes from. And what I've noticed is a lot of times devotees have difficulty in Krishna consciousness, and when devotees have difficulty in Krishna consciousness, one of the reasons is that they're not doing this, so that they're not doing the things that are necessary to do to be Krishna conscious. And they're not, sometimes they're not reading Prabhupada's books, they're not rising early, their rounds aren't done well. So naturally, if you don't take the process well, you will have trouble. That's like it's part of our philosophy that if you don't follow, you will have trouble. And a lot of times devotees would make an astute observation. They would say that the proof of Krishna consciousness is that when you don't follow it, you fall into Maya. It's a kind of a negative proof. And so how do you know this is true? Well, because by following it, I didn't fall into Maya, and as soon as I stopped following it, I did. So that shows that by following it, I stay above the modes of nature, and by not following it, I fall back into the condition of material consciousnness that Krishna describes in Bhagavad Gita, or is described in the Bhagavatam. All those symptoms develop within our heart when we're not Krishna conscious. So that inadvertently establishes the value of Krishna consciousness, because by not following it, all the conditions of material life and material consciousness enwrap one. So it's very practical for us. We can see the power of it. And through work we've done with helping devotees chant japa, they always have, when they chant japa well, they always have realizations of how powerful japa is. And the reason they weren't having realizations of how powerful it was is they weren't chanting well. And so they kind of forgot that japa is powerful. Because if you don't chant well, obviously you don't experience the full power of the holy name, or you may not experience much power if you're committing offenses, no power. So japa workshops enabled people, or facilitated people to chant really good rounds. And so when they chanted good rounds, they always had these realizations of how purifying, how powerful the holy name is. And it always happened that way. It's just a regular thing that happened at the japa workshops. And so what that says to us is that if we're not chanting well, we won't get that taste or realization, and we won't get the benefit of the purity, and that really harms us. It makes it difficult for us to be Krishna conscious. And so the point is, don't make it difficult for yourself. And we think it's difficult. Maybe it's difficult to rise early. Maybe it's difficult to concentrate on our 16 rounds. Maybe it's difficult to tolerate the pushings and pulling of the senses. But it's more difficult to not be Krishna conscious. Now, you have to understand that. However difficult Krishna consciousness is, it's way more difficult not to be Krishna conscious. But in our illusion mind, we think, no, being Krishna consciousness is so difficult. No, material life is what's difficult. Krishna consciousness is not difficult. Sometimes the determination is difficult. The determination to follow, to practice. That may be difficult. But the actual execution is not difficult. And the results of the execution make your life so much easier and so much happier. So don't ever think that it's easier not to be Krishna conscious, or it's easier to take it easy. It's never easier to take it easy. You'll always feel a lack in your heart when you don't make sacrifices for Krishna consciousness. And you'll always feel full when you do. It's just how it works. At least that's my experience. And there's a saying whenever you want to change something, that you change it when you realize the pain of not changing is actually greater than the pain of changing. And there's a lot of wisdom in that. That we may suffer because we're conditioned and it's hard to change. But then we have to live with the consciousness and the action and the results of not changing, which will be more painful in most cases than actually changing. So it's always good to remember that. Another point, that this letter, which we're reading now, is typical of many letters that Prabhupada wrote, where he emphasized the sadhana. And it's interesting, because he emphasized it a lot. And so we have to question why did he continually emphasize it? I mean, if you mention it 5, 10, 15, 20 times, you'd think 20 times would be enough. Prabhupada mentioned it hundreds of times. So that means that Prabhupada felt hundreds of times was necessary, maybe 1,000 times was necessary for us to understand the importance of sadhana. And also because we have a tendency to minimize sadhana. And if you minimize sadhana and you don't immediately fall into Maya, then you think, hey, I minimized sadhana, I'm still here. I'm still going strong, so then everything's okay. So I can keep minimizing it. No, but it's like Hiranyakashipu, when he was fighting Nishingadev. Nishingadev made him feel like he had the upper hand. So Prabhupada said, whenever you think you can get away with Maya or cheat the system, so to speak, and be Krishna conscious, it's just Maya illusioning you to think you can. Because philosophically speaking, you can't. And so to think you can is wrong. Even if it feels like you can, it's wrong. Okay, occasionally, we can't follow. Just like I did some therapy yesterday. Some interesting therapy comes from the Ukraine, which on a cellular level reorganizes your cells. And it's completely wiped me out. And after I did the therapy, I was chanting my rounds and I was continually falling asleep all afternoon. Then I went to sleep and I slept forever. I think I set my world's record of sleeping. And then I got up and started chanting it, and an hour ago I fell asleep again. So I talked to the devotee and she said, yeah, that's what happens when the body's healing. So, sometimes these things happen, right? But what Prabhupada's talking about is on a more regular basis. That if we're regularly minimizing our spiritual practice, then we're finding we're not Krishna conscious. That's just the result of minimizing the spiritual practice. Another problem is becoming satisfied with a low level of Krishna consciousness. So you might say, well, I'm just doing a little bit, but that's okay, because I feel okay. I don't, being in Maya doesn't bother me. But Prabhupada said, the devotee has no fear, but he has fear of being in Maya. So we really shouldn't be okay with Maya. We should fear Maya. Prabhupada told us that. We should fear Maya. So that's important also. If I should have a high standard, or I should at least want to come to the point where I have a high standard for myself in my spiritual practice, based on the fact that I have a high standard for my consciousness. I don't want to do things which would upset or degrade or contaminate my consciousness. So we should be sensitive to what we're doing and how it affects our consciousness, what we're reading, what we're speaking. Like sometimes we become critical devotees and that affects our consciousness. What we're seeing, what we're doing, all these things affect our consciousness. So the more you want to be Krishna conscious, the more you're careful about these things. Because It's like a person who's very healthy, bodybuilder, athlete. They're very careful about their diet. They're very careful to exercise because they don't want to do anything that is going to jeopardize their health. So we should be the same way about our Krishna consciousness. We don't want to do anything. We want to be careful to not do anything that would jeopardize our health, as far as possible. Sometimes you can't avoid it, but as far as possible. That's the idea. Is that okay? All right, you didn't ask any questions. Are you all still there? Or you're in shock. You don't know what to ask. Okay. Or everything has been answered on this topic, so there are no questions. That's possible. As I mentioned once before, when Prabhupada asked for questions and there weren't any, then Prabhupada joked and said, no questions, you know everything. Questions. I always find that questions indicate a deeper understanding of the topic. You know, like sometimes we'll say questions may indicate that I didn't understand. But oftentimes questions indicate that I understood, and because I understood, it brought up more questions. That would I'm looking more deeply at the topic now, so I have questions that will go deeper. So that's the idea. Okay. Anyway, you don't have to have any questions. I still love you all. I won't have any issues with you. Plus, we have to end class now anyway. So thank you for coming, and then tomorrow we will have the class. It is 8:15 Australia time, and I believe it is 12:15 Radhadesh time, which is 11:15 London time, which is, I don't know what time it is, East Coast time, 6:15. Anyway, you can figure that out if you want to attend. And we're talking about the definitions of love, and I think we're gonna go into the science of love, the different levels. It's very, you may not understand anything, but at least if you don't understand it, then you understand that it's something so deep that you don't understand. Just like we did a course on humility, and I think one of the things that I always realize, and probably all the devotees realize when we do this course, is that we don't understand it because we don't have it. Humility is so much different from what we think it is. Because for us, humility is it's relative to other, if I'm not proud, I'm humble. But actually humility, from the spiritual perspective, is something so far out of our range of experience that after a course like